Tabletop Tinkerer here, and the purpose of opening the shop up to you today is to get you as excited as I am about the new playtest that just dropped from Wizards of the Coast earlier this week, detailing our first look at the classes and what it's going to look like for 1 DND moving forward. I have the simple breakdown for you so you don't have to read the 40-page document. Let's get into what it looks like for the classes that are going into the expert group. Before I begin describing for you the various changes that they are making to the classes that they are putting in this group known as the expert group of classes, I wanted to take a second to remind you that liking and subscribing videos is an expert move as a YouTube viewer. It really helps out the channels that you're watching and helps that content keep coming and keeping you informed on the subjects that you care about most. Now, when it comes to this video, I just wanted to give you a very quick guide and tutorial of the major changes that are happening to these classes in a compact way so that you can easily understand what is coming down the road. There are a few other channels that have released more in-depth and detailed breakdowns and descriptions of what all the changes really mean. What I'm going to focus on here today, for the sake of brevity and respecting your time, is to keep it as short as possible and focus on the most important points and what is really going to matter most to you as I see it and what these changes are actually going to mean holistically. Kicking things off, we have the Bard, everybody's favorite musical inspirer and the one best suited to keep DMs on their toes in social situations. It is important to note that while the Bard is still a full caster, they are making drastic changes to spell casting as a whole, and that is going to showcase in both the Bard and the Ranger, which is discussed further in this video. Prepared casting at least has been simplified so that the number of spells you know and the slots that you have to actually use them are going to be one and the same. If you have 2 first level slots, you know 2 first level spells. And it will continue like this. As you gain more spell slots, you will know more spells, and those numbers will be one and the same instead of having multiple things to keep track of. This new method of bookkeeping will also apply to cantrips, so you won't necessarily be stuck with your cantrip choices from the beginning of the game. 2 major reasons that you may want to change your cantrips more or less frequently is that maybe you made a bad decision early on thinking a spell was a little bit better than it was, especially as new players go. Or maybe there's just story reasons why your style of play has completely changed. Maybe you're a little bit more aggressive, or maybe you're a little bit more defensive and have gained a little bit more experience and are a little bit more reserved versus hot-headed. Or maybe you actually did make a really good choice early on in the game, but the spell is just no longer putting out the output at the level that you are now, and you need to make a change to make up for that. Now you can do that with the new style of prepared casting, which has simpler rules for keeping track of the spells known, as well as allowing you to have more flexibility with cantrips. When it comes to the spells that the Bard will know, they're all going to be from one of the 3 new lists that separate the spells, no longer by individual classes, but by Arcane, Primal, and Divine. The Bard will be pulling from the Arcane list of spells, which will, I assume, be mostly used by the Mage group of Warlock, Wizard, and Sorcerer. However, the Bard has a very specific restriction on it to where it will not be like the other casters, and I presume we will see this further on as a continuing trend. They only have 4 schools of magic that they can pull from to prepare spells, unless something specifically gives them a bonus spell, which will allow them to expand on that slightly. The 4 schools are going to be Divination, Illusion, Enchantment, and Transmutation. Otherwise, it may be on that Arcane list, but the Bard will not have access to it. When it comes to the things that you begin the class with, a lot of things stay the same, but a few things stick out that are very drastic. The first thing being, as far as weapon proficiencies go, the Bard only has access to simple melee weapons. It used to be simple melee weapons along with a few other bladed options like the rapier and the longsword, but those are no longer on the table. I assume those will come up with the Valor and Swords Bard being special subclass features that they get at level 3. However, this coupled with a few other things that we will explore the rest of the base Bard class with shows us that this is going to be a much more utilitarian-based Bard than it already was. Furthermore, when it comes to your equipment, you can actually scrap the starting equipment entirely and just start off with 100 gold pieces. But even if you don't do that, you will also get 18 gold pieces with the starting equipment instead of no gold and starting equipment. So you'll get a little bit more on top of what we were revealed last month with getting 50 gold pieces per background that we pick. What is not different for the Bard is the fact that inspiration is still core and crucial to this class at the very base level. It has not gone away, and the progression stays the same, being a D6 and going up to a D12 at the later levels. However, the way that it is used is very different. No longer being an action where you give this dice to somebody to use at a later time. Instead, it is now something that you use as a reaction when somebody is about to make a d20 test, which is going to be an attack roll, saving throw, or skill check, and they will have to use it in the moment. It will no longer go to waste. It will be used every time that you activate this ability instead of going off into limbo and falling off when the time expires. An additional way that you can now use it is as a healing bonus equal to the size of the die when you see somebody get damaged to immediately regain some of that HP that was lost in the moment. The number of times you can use your Bardic Inspiration is also very different, now being tied to your proficiency bonus, meaning that you can use it a number of times equal to your proficiency bonus until you take another long rest. This will get much better at 7th level when it becomes a short rest instead of a long rest. So you will only be getting 2 times a day to use it starting off. However, it will be much more effective in the fact that it won't fall off over time, and you get to strategically decide as the user of this feature when and where it is applied, instead of putting it in the hands of another class who has a lot of other things to keep track of and deal with. Expertise is also very different, not only just for the Bard, but for the entire group of classes as well, because every class that is in the expert group is going to get the expertise feature. No longer specific to just the Bard and the Rogue, but also the Ranger, which falls in this group as well. And apparently, though not included in this document, also the Artificer will be included in this group eventually over time. Why it is worth mentioning for the Bard is that you are actually going to be getting it earlier, 1 level each time, being at 2nd and 9th level instead of 3rd and 10th level. And as we level up and see more familiar things, Song of Rest is actually going away entirely. Well, not quite, because you are getting a song in its place, known as Song of Restoration. However, the way it works is very different. It is no longer tied to rest and getting some additional temporary HP or anything like that. Instead, you are getting a list very similar to the subclass list of spells that are a little bit more divine in nature, being Greater Restoration, Lesser Restoration, being the 2 restoration spells, as well as Healing Word and its more powerful Mass Healing Word. And on top of that, as a little bonus, Freedom of Movement. These come in at different levels, not all at one time, but it will expand your spell list, and it will also give you some options that are not within the schools of magic that Bards are otherwise restricted to. Subclasses are going to work more or less in the same light. However, with the Bard, and this goes with a few other classes as well, you are getting additional subclass features at different levels to kind of break up some of those large gaps that some classes like the Bard and the Rogue, for example, had, where you didn't get any subclass feature at all. We are still following the blueprint of 3rd, 6th, and 14th level, but we are getting an additional subclass feature at 10th level to break up that long gap. Jack of all trades and Font of Inspiration are very similar to how they were in the 2014 version. However, Jack of all trades can no longer apply to your initiative bonus because the bonus that it applies to has to have the chance for you to have proficiency in the first place. You cannot get proficiency in initiative. Therefore, Jack of all trades will not apply to such roles. When it comes to Font of Inspiration, as noted earlier, this is still the point where your long rest charge instead goes to a short rest charge. But also now, if your use of Bardic Inspiration in this moment fails, it does not expand a charge at all. You attempt it, and it either succeeds, or you get to try it again later. This is absolutely amazing for the Bard. You're basically getting a feature where you get to use it and try again until it works out right. Now, in the moment, it may not mean a lot that you get to use it again later because you're still going to fail in that moment, but it allows for potential success later on down the road. And as we roll more dice, the chances of that success are going to get a little bit better and a little bit better for us to get those better and better rolls. Magical Secrets will be coming in at 11th and 15th level. It still works very much the same in that you are choosing 2 spells that you otherwise didn't have access to from the other spell list, being the Primal and Divine. However, your school restrictions are still going to apply. You will choose one at the 11th level, be able to pick 2 spells, and they're going to count. Now that it is a prepared caster, you will be able to change these spell selections as you go on throughout the day, that's a lot. It's going to create a lot of different possibilities for sure. When you get to 15th level, you will take the other list that you didn't choose from. So if you pick Primal at 11th, you will pick Divine at 15th, and vice versa, giving you access to all 3 spell lists, which I have a feeling isn't going to be something that is doable without multiclassing by any other character at the table. Our capstone is being moved down to level 18, which is going to be true for all the classes, and there's a reason we will discuss in a minute. and will now be called Superior Bardic Inspiration. What that means is, instead of recharging just on a short rest or a long rest, you will get 2 uses of Bardic Inspiration recharged every time that you roll initiative. So the more you fight and the more you engage, the more uses of Bardic Inspiration you are going to have, making it much less likely, especially coupled with Font of Inspiration, that you are going to actually run out of inspiration. You're hitting those higher levels, you're almost level 20, go nuts, go wild. You are a true hero at this point, and I'm all for it. The reason the capstones are all getting moved down to 18th level is to open up 20th level to a new thing they're calling Epic Boons, which are additional features that come into play at level 20. I am going to have a whole nother video discussing what these Epic Boons are, how they work, and what they really mean for the game, so I won't get into too much detail for it here, but I will say it will drastically affect the way the game is played. It will also allow for people to dabble into multi-classing and still achieve those capstones depending on the choices that they want to make. I can't say definitively that I know the exact reason why they went this direction, but I'm seeing a few benefits here and there for that to be the case. What I can say is getting these features faster, I'm okay with. 20th level is a long way off, and most games never even get to 18th level, let alone 20th level. So the faster we can get those better features, I think is a really good thing. They have also included for each class the most iconic subclass with them and a rework to show you how the subclasses are going to interact with the main classes. Of course, with the Bard, it has to be the College of Lore. You will still be getting the 3 additional proficiencies, however, they are chosen specifically for you. They are going to be intelligence-based skills of Arcana, Nature, and History. However, if you're already proficient in one of these 3, or all 3, or 2 of the 3, you instead get to select other proficiencies equal to a number of times, based off the ones that you already have. You are no longer going to be getting an additional use of magical secrets. I sort of see why they did this, considering there's only 2 other lists to choose from, but I think they could have gone about this differently and still made it work to where you get improved magical secrets. But they are giving you an improved cutting word. So cutting word still works the same, except it is no longer going to be able to detract from an opponent's damage, only their attack roll or a saving throw, aka a d20 test used by an opponent. When the cutting words feature gets improved, not only will it detract from the opponent's d20 test, it will also do damage to them equal to your charisma modifier. So still a reason to get that charisma modifier up. And Peerless Skill, while doing ultimately the same thing, will instead only activate if a roll is failed. Therefore, you don't have to not know and potentially lose out on the feature entirely. Otherwise, it's ultimately still the same. I think these changes for the Bard are really more of a one-for-one, a lateral. It's going to be different, it's going to feel a little bit different and new and refreshing, which is good after 8 years of playing the same classes, but I don't really see it as a net benefit or a net loss. I think it's more just the same overall. When it comes to the College of Lore, I find it to be a little lackluster. I think the subclass could use a little bit more zhuzh. I think what they could have done though with magical secrets is giving you enhanced magical secrets to couple with the fact that they don't have a 3rd list to choose from. What they could have said instead is when you obtain a feature known as magical secrets, including instances of it that you already have, you get an additional spell, meaning you would get 3 spells from each list as College of the Lore. And it would basically play out to be the same as originally designed, but would also work with the new system. Maybe we'll just go ahead and throw that into the playtest review document survey that they release later this month. Next up, we're going to have the Ranger. And while the Ranger's changes may not be as many, we'll say, as the Bard, they're going to be much more drastic. The Ranger's going to look very, very different than it did in 2014. And honestly, preview now, spoiler alert, it's a good thing. I'm just going to tell you right now, it is a good thing. The starting proficiencies, etc., are all going to be the same, but we are going to have the change to, instead of rolling for gold and starting equipment, you are instead going to be getting the 150 gold pieces that the starting equipment would otherwise be worth to make your own choices moving forward. You are also, as stated previously, going to be getting expertise as the Ranger, not just once, but also twice, like the Bard and the Rogue. 1st level, right off the bat, as well as at 9th level. Also at 1st level, you're getting Favorite Enemy, of course. Though I said it looked drastically different, some key features are still going to be the same, but they are going to work so drastically different. Not too unlike the Bardic Inspiration with the Bard. Key features are still there, but they're going to work mechanically a little bit different to work in cohesion with this new system, as it were. Favorite Enemy is now essentially a buffed up version of the Hunter's Mark spell. We know that Hunter's Mark is going to be a spell on the primal spell list. Pretty easy guess, even if we didn't already know it, as it were. Which means it's also going to be accessible to classes like, say, the Druid. However, it is still really going to be the Ranger's plaything. The reason being, and this is the best change by far from the packet, from beginning to end in all 40 pages, Hunter's Mark will no longer cost concentration for the Ranger, which means that the spell overall is still going to require concentration, just not if you're a Ranger. So if you're a Druid, still applies. This is really good because we know, historically speaking, the Rangers have a very good selection of concentration-based spells, and they were constantly, from 2014 up until now, battling with Hunter's Mark as to where their concentration needed to go. No more. You cast Hunter's Mark once with a bonus action, and it is now set for the duration of the spell. No concentration required. Furthermore, the capstone of the Ranger is now tied directly into this feature and Hunter's Mark, being that it will go from a D6 additional damage to a D10 with the same spell. Spellcasting and fighting styles are still very similar for the Ranger, including that they are going to come in at second level. However, there are a few restrictions in this case. Specifically with the Ranger, you have full access to the primal spell list, not dissimilar to the Bard, but you do have a restriction, but this one's slightly different. Instead of only having a few schools to choose from, you can pick anything from the primal spell list unless it's an evocation spell. No Ranger, you're not getting an evocation spell. Maybe a subclass will focus on evocation spells, and that'll be interesting to see what that looks like. But as of right now, that's going to be a no-go school for the Ranger class. The fighting styles for the Ranger are going to be restricted to archery, defense, and two-weapon fighting. However, there is going to be an interaction with fighting style feats. Normally, these are going to be reserved for the warrior group. That is detailed at the beginning of this document, which is going to include the monk, the barbarian, and the fighter, of course. Rangers will also have access to these feats and will not be barred by the normal prerequisite of having to be from the warrior group, which the Ranger is not, of course, here being in the expert group. Everything else about the Ranger, for the most part, up until 7th level, is relatively the same with one major exception. All of the travel things that came in for the Ranger at level 1 are just gone. Not replaced with anything, not slightly different, they are just completely gone. They've tried to make up for that a little bit with a 7th level class feature known as Roving, which increases your movement speed by 10 feet and also gives you a climbing speed and a swimming speed equal to your overall speed. Typically will be 40, but potentially it may even be higher, especially if you went and taken the mobile feat. You can really, as a Ranger, focus on mobility and moving around the battlefield now. And not only with just moving faster, but going in different directions, including climbing speeds. Swimming speeds I don't think are going to come up as much, but having a climbing speed is going to drastically change a lot of combats, especially when it comes to dungeons. At 11th level, we are going to get a new feature known as Tireless. It does two things. First off, when you finish a long or a short rest, you're going to get a D8 plus your proficiency bonus worth of temporary HP. So you're going to be a little bit more sturdier and able to survive, what the Rangers are supposed to be good at. On top of that, you're going to be recovering better overall. I know this because the second part of this feature is recovery from exhaustion. Now note, and I'm not going into this in detail in this video, but exhaustion is going to work very, very differently. And I can tell you, based off the changes that are there, it is going to be incorporated in more and more of your games instead of being one of those things that are included in the game but sort of off to the wayside and rarely seen. The Ranger is going to be able to cope with these changes especially well because what won't change about exhaustion is you only get one level of exhaustion back, or taken away from you rather, when you take a long rest. Which means if you have a few levels, it's going to take a while to get rid of them. Ranger recovers faster, because not just on long rests, but also short rests, the Ranger will also get another level reduced. Meaning where most can only get one per day, the Ranger will be able to get 2. So quite literally twice as fast. Nature's Veil is a little bit different, though still working to simply conceal the Ranger's location, and now comes in at 13th level and is much more streamlined and simplified. It's very simple. You become invisible as a bonus action, which means you have a very good second level spell that you get to use essentially for free, and instead of it being an action, it is now a bonus action. Not a lot to say, because it's very simple, and sometimes simple is just better. Makes it all work a little bit easier together. Feral Senses, another very good Ranger feature, also follows this trend of being very similar, coming in at a different level, now at 15th, and just being a more simplified version. Instead of being a complex paragraph of how vision works and the like, you just get 30 feet of blind sense, or rather blind sight. Doesn't make it any less powerful, and in some cases, honestly, makes it a little bit more powerful, and it just, we all know what it does. It works a lot better, at least on the eyes of reading it. It will make the players' lives a lot easier instead of trying to figure out what it is that they're actually trying to say and if they're trying to trick you with the wording a little bit. It's very simple. You get 30 feet of blindside, which means out to 30 feet, you can see things as if you were Daredevil, essentially. Congratulations. And being that we've already covered the capstone being an increased buff to Hunter's Mark and favorite enemy, that's about it for the Ranger class until we get to the subclass, which is, of course, most iconic. Remember, it's the Hunter. The Hunter is just as different from its 2014 counterpart as the Ranger class itself. You're no longer getting a slew smorgasbord of options. If you're going to be a Hunter, you're going to be a Hunter. Not a different type of Hunter, you're just going to be a Hunter. It isn't to say that the class is bad, however. And at level 3, you're going to get Hunter's Prey, which means any creature that has a little bit of blood coming off their body, aka they've been damaged at some point in the combat before this attack, you will do an additional D8 of damage. Couple that with Hunter's Mark and favorite enemy, it's going to be a fun time. Not for them, for you, the Hunter. And coming in with that synergy again at level 6 is Hunter's Lore, which ties into directly with Hunter's Mark because it requires you to have Hunter's Mark activated in order to use it. Instead of just doing extra damage to the creature, you now know its weaknesses, its resistances, and also its vulnerabilities. You know how many of them it has? You know that it has them, and you know exactly what they are, so you can make strategic choices and inform your party that this is what we need to do. 10th level is a very interesting feature and is again tied in with a spell, and that in and of itself isn't very interesting. It's the 3rd level spell of Conjure Barrage, which is a 60-foot cone dealing damage essentially of projectiles that come from the center point of you outwards, dealing damage to multiple people. You have to be careful not to hit your friends, but it can cover a wide spread. What's interesting about it, though, it is introducing a concept that doesn't really get named, but I will call here undercasting. You have upcasting where you take a spell of one level and then cast it at a higher level with a higher level spell slot. With this feature, you get to take Conjure Barrage and cast it not just at 3rd level, but 2nd and 1st level, reducing the damage dealt overall by 1d8 per step down that you go. What I think they're getting at here is the Ranger being a little bit more resourceful and being able to use the tools that it needs at a reduced capacity when it needs to use them, so that it's not completely cut off from things by these level restrictions. At 14th level, you gain something known as Hunter's Superior Defense. What that does is it will give you resistance to an attack coming to hit you once per turn. When it hits you, that extra damage doesn't just go away. Instead, you get to redirect the attack so that it kind of glances off your body and hits somebody else next to you. So if you're being swarmed by enemies, you can, while still taking some of the damage, you can then redirect that extra damage to another foe, causing them to hit their own allies and reducing their effectiveness overall as a group. I have to say that I am really totally and utterly in love with these changes to the Ranger. I think thematically it makes it more its own thing versus feeling like a class that does what all the other classes does in a different capacity. And I think it really plays into what to me a Ranger is. Someone that runs roughshod through the wildlands. Somebody that can survive. Somebody that knows how to really assess a situation, especially when it comes to other creatures, and make decisions based off that information and react accordingly. It has more tools at its disposal now to do those things, especially when it comes to the Hunter subclass, really hammering that idea home. And I have to say, for once, I'm really excited to play the Ranger. The Rogue is a very simple class, and as such, the changes made to it are very simple and not widespread. Essentially, every feature that it had before, it still has. And it's only picked up 1 or 2 things that are really different from the 2014 version. However, that's not to say that they aren't drastic. I think when we're looking at the Rogue, we are going to have to dig into some of the other things, which I've tried to avoid doing in this video, to really focus on the classes themselves. However, the way the Rogue is being geared up to work is in tandem with other changes that are taking place in the game. Whether that's overall going to work out for the better, I'm not sure, but they are going to require context to evaluate appropriately and decide how we feel about them moving forward. Starting off with proficiencies, still relatively the same. However, instead of having just simple weapons and a few specific weapons, it is now simple weapons and any martial weapon specifically with the finesse feature. Meaning that the Rogue can have access to any martial weapon that allows you to use your dexterity modifier with it. Expertise is going to be more or less the same, coming at 1st level, but the second instance of it will now be at 7th level instead of 6th. The reason for this change is that at 6th level, you're getting a new subclass feature instead, breaking up that big gap from 3rd to 9th level, which is the main reason why, even though I love the rogue class, I don't play a rogue, because I like subclass features. And if I don't get one soon enough, I'm going to go find somewhere else to get one. The difference with sneak attack, however, the progression's the same. It still comes in when you attack something. However, it only comes in when you take the attack action to hit something. What does that mean? It means you can't do it on an attack of opportunity. Here's the thing. I know some of you didn't even know you could actually do, from 2014, sneak attack on an attack of opportunity. I know, because I've seen it come up. However, you could, and that made the rogue really even better than before, because it meant you could potentially sneak attack twice in a round versus just once. Now you're really only going to be able to do it the one time. Again, it comes down to the wording. It specifically says it has to happen on your turn, and also that it has to be a part of the attack option. Both of these things separately by themselves would disqualify it from it being an attack of opportunity, but together it completely excludes it. You will not be able to do it on anything other than the attack action on your turn. Just trying to be clear. Now, the reason that I think that they are doing this, and you will see why it's important to state this afterwards, even though I'm not sure that it completely offsets this change, is that dual wielding is going to be a lot more effective in 1D&D, being that it is no longer a bonus action to do so. If you are carrying two weapons that you could dual wield with, you can attack with both of them as part of the same attack action. A huge change is happening with the rogue, however, at 13th and 14th level. The subclass feature you get will now come in at 14th level instead of at 13th. Blind Sense is going away entirely, and you instead will be getting something known as Subtle Strikes at level 13 in place of that subclass feature that got bumped up one. Subtle Strikes is very simple and very in line with the keeping of the rogue. What it does is anytime a creature that you are attacking, whether from at range or up close and personal, is within 5 feet of another ally of yours that is not incapacitated, you have advantage on the strike. There you go. More likely to crit with that sneak attack. Slippery Mind, Elusive, and Stroke of Luck are all basically the same thing with very minor changes. Some of them even just being at a different level now. Slippery Mind now also gives you saving throw proficiency with charisma saving throws and not just wisdom, which is a huge bonus. That's 100% more saving throws than it gave before. And getting a saving throw proficiency that you didn't have before is a huge deal. It's worth taking an entire separate feat over with the resilient feat in a lot of cases, especially when it comes to something like charisma or wisdom, where a lot of spells that you don't want to get hit with will require you to make one of those exact saving throws. Elusive, the feat where you just can't have advantage imposed upon you from an attack roll by another creature, now gets bumped down to level 17, and that is to make room for the level 18 capstone of Stroke of Luck, where you get to auto crit once per day. Of course, those two changes are to make room for the epic boons that will come in at level 20. Now, moving on to the subclass for the rogue, if you guessed it was going to be the thief, you guessed right. And again, we're following the same pattern here. A lot of the things are thematically the same, though mechanically different. For example, with fast hands, you're still getting that bonus with the sleight of hand. However, there's now a whole new action to consider known as the search action that fast hands is going to be interacting with that you can use as a bonus action. The search action basically allows you to intake information, whether that be through investigation or insight and a whole host of other things. It's an entirely different rule set that I don't want to get into and bog down a video about character classes, but it will essentially make you faster at finding out and deducing things. Second story work follows a similar pattern, beginning with the climbing aspect of it. Now, instead of it being a little bit more complicated interaction with difficult terrain, it's its own thing, giving you a flat climbing speed. When it comes to the jumping part of it, again, there's a rules change that has to be considered here. Jumping is no longer going to be something that is specific to your character that you have to go look up the rule for every time it comes up, because we don't jump every session or every combat even. Yes, jumping does come up, and it comes up more often than the exhaustion rules in my experience. However, it is still a lot more rare than a lot of other things, and I even find myself having to go back and look up the rules for jumping almost every time it comes up. No longer. Now it is specifically a strength check, and you just jump however many feet, the dice number that you rolled, plus the strength bonuses. With second story work, that is now going to be a dexterity check instead of a strength check. I feel like that should be something that goes to the rogue in general, but okay. Supreme Sneak comes in now at 6th level instead of 9th level, getting it much earlier, and it's also a stronger feat where you no longer have to move at half speed to get the advantage on stealth checks. You just have that advantage as long as you're not wearing heavy armor. So you get it faster, and it's a better feat. When it comes to use magic item, it's just different. It has the same general spirit. It is still the rogue interacting with magical items in ways that it wouldn't have otherwise been able to. However, it is not as all-inclusive as before, but it has a few extra features to sort of offset that. No longer is there any language in there about a rogue using a magic item that it doesn't meet the prerequisites for. The exception being scrolls, where you can use cantrip and first level scrolls so long as you pass an arcana check to do so. Being a DC 10 for a cantrip and a DC 11 for a first level spell, which means you're going to probably get a decent amount of time, especially if that's something you want to focus on. You're going to have arcane knowledge, at least if you're really filling out the theme of your character appropriately on your character sheet. What it now also has in addition to this is that you can attune to 4 magic items, where most characters, minus the artificer, can only attune to 3. So you get an additional attunement slot. As well, and this is an entirely new thing from what I've seen, is when you're using a magic item that takes charges, you get to roll a d6 when you do so. If that d6 comes up as a 6 or the maximum value on that dice, you don't use a charge. Meaning you could potentially, though not likely to happen, just keep using a magic item that uses charges all the live long day as if it doesn't have charges. Now you would have to get really lucky and roll a lot of 6s, and that's just not going to happen. But the concept's still there, is you can just really hack into and utilize the magic items that are at your disposal, and you have more of them. Thief's Reflexes is actually more different from its 2014 counterpart than Use Magic Item is. It's still the capstone for the subclass of Thief of the Rogue at 14th level, but it doesn't work the same at all. Instead of just being something that happens in the first round of initiative each combat, it is something that you get to decide when it's used, and you have a number of uses equal again to your proficiency modifier a number of times per long rest. Also, it's not you getting an entirely extra turn. Instead, what it is you being able to use an extra bonus action from the list of things you can do as your cunning action for that turn. So it's offset a little bit. You get to decide when it takes place. You get potentially more uses of it, especially within a single combat, because you can use it more than once in a single combat. So if you've used it more than one time in one combat, then you have used it 100% more times than you could have previously used the previous edition. However, it is also, I would say, a lot weaker. So you have more control over when it's taking place and can be a little bit more strategic with it, but it's also a lot less effective. Overall, the Rogue, the jury's out. I'm going to have to see it in practice. I'm going to have to see what those other rules really look like and how they play out in the game over time, and that will make my determination for how I feel about the class overall. At this time, I just can't make a ruling. But that's just how I see these classes and what I think is going to come of the game going on down the road. I'm overall very optimistic with a few reservations. What do you think? Have you read through the playtest document? Did I miss anything of importance that you think people should know about? Please let them know in the comments below. And do you disagree with any of my takes here? I'd love to hear about how you view these changes and what you think of the new direction of 1D&D. And until the shop opens back up, keep working towards a better game.